right. Okay, I think we're going to get started here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Jennifer Ackerman. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Architecture, and it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Germane Barnes, who teaches architecture at the University of Miami at Coral Gables. Tonight's lecture is part of the College of Architecture and Design lecture series and is supported by the Robert B. Church III Memorial Lecture Fund. Professor Germane Barnes is a scholar, educator, and designer whose work examines how identity and culture influence architecture. He studies architecture's social and political agency through historical research, through the inclusion of cultural perspectives and narratives, and through design speculation. He challenges the status quo in architecture. Germane holds a BS in architecture from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He was conferred a Master of Architecture degree from Woodbury University, where he won the thesis prize for his project Symbiotic Territories, Architectural Investigations of Race, Identity, and Community. He's an educator and a practitioner, teaching at Miami while maintaining a practice that blends architecture, social practice, and urban planning. His professional career bears influence from his time working with Jennifer Bonner and Christian Stainer through their collaboration on the project Made in OPA-LOCKA, a community-wide design project exploring the nature of public space. That experience positioned Germane well to then serve as the designer in residence of OPA-LOCKA, himself leading projects including community gardens, urban farms, public houses, and a community studio art space. He also develops critical architectural scholarship and research. In 2018, Germane was awarded a Graham Foundation grant in support of his project, Sacred Stoops, Typological Studies of Black Congregational Spaces, which investigates the residential porch and its role in African American community. To me, Germane Barnes' work asks essential questions of agency. Who decides what the built environment should be like? What should it care for? What stories can it honor and inspire? And I'm so glad he's taking the time to share his work with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Germane Barnes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Might steal some of those lines and add it to my bio. I definitely did not. I didn't give that. Thank you, University of Tennessee, for having me. Definitely appreciate this. This is my first time in Knoxville, so everything is pretty new to me. But so far, I've had 2 really good meals. I've met a lot of really nice people. So if the rest of my time here is like this, you have definitely won me over. So the title of my lecture is A Children's Story, which is my way of framing the power of narrative with architecture. And so we're going to talk about 3 projects. Each of those projects have a couple sub-projects within them. So realistically, I'm finding a way to steal some time to get 7 or 8 projects within this lecture. And so those will all be weaved together through narratives such as the changing of a narrative with the Made in OPA-LOCKA proposal, the telling of an untold narrative, which is the Sacred Stoops proposal, and creating a narrative in Delray Beach, Florida. All right, so with that said, we'll get started. So Made in OPA-LOCKA is the first project that we're going to talk about. OPA-LOCKA is in northwest Miami-Dade. It is a pretty small city. It's about 15,000 people. It was incorporated in 1926. And it has the largest collection of Moorish revival architecture in the Western Hemisphere. So just a really bizarre place. Like I like to tell people it's a dystopic Disneyland. For the most part, right? It was planned around the exact same time as Coral Gables and Miami Beach, so Coral Gables being Spanish Revival and the beach being Art Deco. And so I got here through a project with Christian Stainer and Jennifer Bonner, who were both my thesis advisors when I was in graduate school. And so they found this organization called the OPA-LOCKA CDC, who in turn had a grant to do some redevelopment in a neighborhood called the Triangle. And that's what this portion up here is, right? This little triangular area, now called Magnolia North. And then there's the downtown area down here, right? So Our proposal was that we would not be designers or architects who would drop in art and then leave and go on about our business, right? So how do you help a community from afar? So what made our proposal unique was that I would actually move from Los Angeles to this neighborhood within OPA-LOCKA, which at one point in time had the highest murder rate in the entire country. So if you can imagine, my mom and dad freaked out a bit. So they're like, you're choosing to move from North Hollywood in LA to OPA-LOCKA, Florida. Is that even a real place? I was like, yeah, I mean, you always tell me go explore, make the world a better place, and now you're telling me not to move away. Also, I'm the youngest of 6, so they kind of freak out a bit anytime I do things, but at the same time, they don't really care. Like, if you're a youngest, you understand that at a certain point, they're just like, all right, whatever, you'll figure it out. So it's kind of the way that it works, right? So as I said, it has the largest collection of Moorish revival architecture in the Western Hemisphere. So a lot of the architecture that you see looks like this. There's a lot of domes, minarets. These buildings are almost 100 years old. A lot of them are on the National Historic Registry as well. So my office, when I first moved there, was actually in this building right here, in the historic Herb building, which at one point in time was a hospital, a hotel, a gas station, then a hospital again, then a community development corporation, and now the first floor has a urgent care center on the first level. So it goes through a lot of different permutations of use. That's it. At the top left is a historic train station, which doesn't operate at the moment, but it's just there. It's a nice object. And this is some of the housing stock that you'll find there, right? So a lot of bright colors, a lot of blues, a lot of bright colors. Coming from the Midwest, it's really odd when you see houses that are like pinks and greens and things like that, but I have to get used to it when I moved, right? So you start to see a lot of these sort of color palettes throughout the area, which are pretty unique to South Florida. And so our Made in OPA-LOCKA proposal started in 2013. That's when we found out we were awarded the competition. We were one of 5 teams that was awarded. So the CEO got a bit greedy. It was like, well, instead of having one proposal, I want all 5 finalists to just be the 5 winners, and we'll figure out a way to split the money from there. And then over time, certain firms decided to remove themselves from the proposal because 5 people, 5 firms, 1 small neighborhood doesn't really work out as well as you think it would financially. When in turn, by the end of the first year, both Christian and Jennifer had to explore other options as well because the project was taking so long, it was so stagnant that we were trying to figure out how do we even make these things happen, especially when we're trying to do interventions at properties like this, at this historic church in a neighborhood, which now, Kathy, doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down. So these are some of the housing stock that you find in the area. And this is sort of some of the porch stuff as well. Like you see a lot of the chairs that are on the porch, the spaces, congregational spaces, people hang out. And so by now, it's 2014. Nothing's been done yet with the project. I have to decide if I want to stay in OPA-LOCKA or if I want to move and go back to Los Angeles. And the community development organization gave me an offer. They said, well, we know that the things that you wanted to do haven't come to fruition, but we love if you stay on because we like you, and I'm sure we can figure out some kind of way to keep you a part of the fold. Would you like to be our designer in residence? Like, I don't know what that means, but sure, I'll stick on. And so I became one of 2 people in the design department, myself and a young lady named Eileen Allen. She wrote all the grants. I did all the design. So from 2014 to 2018, we were actually able to secure the necessary funding to actually start implementing things where I was solely the lead designer from that point going forward. So it really worked out that this amazing opportunity that Jennifer and Christian gave to me ended up being something that allowed me to push my career forward at such an early age. And that was the Made in OPA-LOCKA proposal. So part of the narrative that I spoke about is how do you change a neighborhood's narrative. So during the 80s, there was a big crack epidemic in a lot of black communities across the country, specifically in OPA-LOCKA because of its convergence among many different means of transportation. So you have the highway, you have the major I-95, you have 826, which are these big thoroughfares that created this pocket that allowed a lot of crime to get in and out. So drugs, murder, things like that. And we're like, well, how do we change the narrative? Well, you make an OPA-LOCKA, you design an OPA-LOCKA, you read an OPA-LOCKA, you do, you make. It becomes a place of creation as opposed to a place where things go to die or even worse. And so we started to have these exhibitions where we would put up flags, and this is at History Miami, where we talk about the history of the area, the importance of the history of the legacy of the people that live there. And then some people in this photo are members of the CDC at the time. It's really important that I show this image because this woman over here, her name is Stephanie Williams Baldwin, and she's retired now, the VP of the CDC. And it was part of her vision that the CDC can become a place that you have a lot of housing and work and development. And the young man there in the front with the blue shirt is actually now the vice mayor of the city of OPA-LOCKA. And he actually started in the CDC same time I did, where I was doing some of the design work. He was being a community organizer. And he's been able to elevate himself to the level of vice mayor in the city to try to make infrastructural changes at a policy level. One of the things that we like to do is go into the community and talk to people about what do we think we want to do. And so when we first did our proposal, we had all these amazing ideas of how we wanted to help and fix the neighborhood. And then we would go to these community meetings, and the young people would have no idea what we meant and say, well, we don't want that. We just want a park. You'd say, all right, but we have all these amazingly beautiful things to offer you. We have these design spaces, and why don't you want this? And it's like, well, we just want somewhere to play. And so at that point, you have to decide, who am I designing for? Am I designing for myself, or am I designing for the public that are going to use these spaces? And how do you negotiate between the two? And so this is the triangle that I spoke of, right? So obviously, it's triangular in shape. This was an open plot of land where we were able to institute the Magnolia North Community Park. And then I showed this image in the top right. And it's extremely important because, as I mentioned, crime in the area, the thing that the city thought was the best method to move forward was to put up barricades at the end of every street. So the X's you see along the top of the drawing are the locations of barricades which force people to only have one means of entry and exit into the neighborhood. So that way, if the police are chasing you in the car or something and you go inside the neighborhood, you're stuck in the neighborhood while you're in your car. So if you can imagine being a resident of this area, you're basically treated like a trapped animal. Like, you're not allowed the same freedoms of other areas. So a lot of people fled the neighborhood. They moved away. There's a lot of disinvestment in the area. It was pretty empty. I remember when my mom came to visit me for the first time, and she was like, wow, there's nobody here. I was like, yeah, it's a pretty empty neighborhood. She was like, well, I feel happier now because there's nobody here, and I know you'll be safe. And it's like, all right, I guess. But part of their process is, how do you meet people? So my first week there, I walked from house to house, took a photograph of every single home. And, we are architects, right? So we do everything very methodically. And so I was like, all right, if I'm standing this far from the front home, I have to stand this exact step for every single house. So I'm walking down the middle of the street doing this. And there's people outside on their porches, and they're like, what the hell is this kid doing? Why is he walking in the middle of the street? And I'm lucky enough to where, at the time, I was only 27 years old doing all of this. So he's like, hey, what are you doing in the neighborhood? Are you the cops? Because I have a camera, and I'm taking the photographs. I'm like, no, I'm a student at the University of Miami, and I'm doing work. And it's like, clearly, I'm not a student, but because I look like a student, it worked. So he's like, all right, go ahead, whatever. So I was like, all right. I easily could have been a cop, but I said that I wasn't, so you believe me. So I'm walking around, and I'm taking the photos, and I canvass the entire neighborhood, right? So I take a photo of every single home, have conversations with people who are outside, people who don't, can have conversation with them. But in the end, I started meeting a lot of people. They knew my face, and they're like, well, what are you doing in our neighborhood? I'm like, well, I just moved in. And they look at me up and down. They're like, you don't live in this neighborhood. Like, what's that supposed to mean? They're like, look at how you're dressed. I'm like, okay. What am I wearing that's so different that makes you think I don't live here? Like, well, you just don't look like us. I'm like, well, I live over on Duval, 15037. You can knock on my door. I'm there. That's where I live. And that personality trait that I think I got from my father, which is basically, you treat everybody the same. You have conversation, the same conversation you have with the person who's bringing your food from the person who's cleaning the table. Like, it's just what you do. And so that personality has allowed me into a lot of rooms that people just feel comfortable. And this is one of those spaces where it worked out really well, because these are people who've been traditionally lied to, trampled on. They've been told, we'll get you a park, and nothing ever happens. We'll get housing, nothing ever happens. There's a lot of disinvestment in the area. At one point in time, a lot of these open lots that you see throughout the drawing were bought up by Habitat for Humanity, right? So it's like, do good, architectural saviorism, let's do what we can to fix the neighborhood. But then you realize that people in the neighborhood can't afford the mortgage that comes with a single-family home. So, like, why would you provide that housing stock to a population that can't afford it? And so, in turn, nothing got built, and they just gave all the parcels back to the city. So it's completely undeveloped, right? So it's like, again, more failed promises. But they asked for a park. So we said, hell, we'll give them a park. So we found these open lots in the neighborhood. We only owned one of the four, right? But we said, if you want to tell us something, come find us. So it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, that whole thing. So we designed this park, and we did it with the help of Kaboom. And you guys know what Kaboom is? You watch Parks and Recs, right? This is a real thing. I thought it was fake, and then I moved to South Florida, and I realized Kaboom was a real organization. So what Kaboom does is they have this idea of play everywhere, right? It's like kids should have spaces to play, adults should have spaces to congregate, play everywhere. And so there's this really funny episode of Parks and Recs where there's a guy who says, this isn't a real organization. We just go around and make people do tons of work and then leave. And that's literally what Kaboom is. Like, they come in and they say, we're going to spend 9 months planning how to implement this park, because you have to do it in 2 days. You get 48 hours to build a park. And so you have to find a sponsor. Ours was MetLife. Then you have to find volunteers. So you're reaching out to whatever network you have to get people to come in. So you get like 200 volunteers. But what they don't tell you is that's for the second day. It's not for the first day. The first day, you're doing all the site prep. So you're digging trenches. You're getting everything ready so that the second day, everything is idiot-proof so that people don't hurt themselves. Liability waivers. All you have to do is move some mulch around, twist a couple bolts, and that's it. So what you see was this empty lot that at first phase, the first day becomes this because me and 2 other people have to do all of this by ourselves because nobody tells us this. Now, again, I am from the city of Chicago. We don't have palm trees, okay? I never knew how a palm tree was planted. I assumed they were like small little saplings and you put them in and then you walk away. Wrong. It's not how it works. They're huge. They're already huge. And you have to build these wooden planks to hold them in place. So I'm standing here in the middle of the sun just cutting wood over, like this is the worst day of my life. Architecture studio never told me this is what I will be doing. Like, you cut tiny pieces of model, but you're not cutting 2x4s over and over and over again. And so as I'm doing this, we have food and snacks off to the side. And I'm watching these guys in the neighborhood walk past, around the same age as me, maybe younger. And they're just staring at me as I'm cutting stuff. And so I look back and I say, you going to help me or you going to stare at me? And so they're like, oh, I'm good. I'm not helping. I walk away. And so one of the guys is brave. He walks around and he's like, well, I don't know how to use a saw. Like, don't worry. I'll teach you. We're going to do this Henry Ford assembly line like you cut, I hammer, we're going to bang this out. I do not want to be out here all day. It's hot as hell. I can't do this. So the guy helps me. He helps me for like an hour, hour and a half, and he goes to get food and he leaves. And so the second day, when everybody comes out and we're done and like all the people with money and titles come when it's over and they sign all the documents and they cut ribbons and you're like, you weren't here. I started from the bottom. You weren't here, like at all while I was doing this, right? And so when you're doing this kind of stuff, he walked up with his kid, his daughter. And so I tried to get close enough to hear the conversation, but not close enough to be a creep. You know, like it's a fine line that you have to negotiate. And I overhear the conversation he's having with his daughter, and he goes, your dad helped build this. And I'm like, yes, because he's one of the neighborhood drug dealers. If he's behind the project, his knucklehead friends won't do anything to it. So to this day, everything is exactly as you see in this photo. They maintain the entire park without any help from the city of OPA-LOCKA because it's not a city of OPA-LOCKA project. And people in the neighborhood care about it because they're the ones that designed it and helped build it, right? I was just the conduit to make sure that all these things went proper, right? And I cut a whole lot of wood and put up a lot of palm trees. And so once we finished that project in 2015, we were able to move on and start working on the Arts and Recreation Center. So the Arts and Recreation Center is the only community facility that the city of OPA-LOCKA has. So we're like, all right, let's give them some kind of space. So we found an old warehouse, used to be a roofing company, and we turned it into our offices. And then we realized OPA-LOCKA is a food desert. So how do we provide fresh food to the area as well? And so through resources of the University of Miami, we had some students go out to the neighborhood, talk to some individuals, and figure out what do they cook, what do they eat, so we know what to plant within the area. And so similar to the park, we partnered with John Deere, Home Depot, and we got volunteers out, and we did community build days, and we started to build the whole thing. In the top right-hand corner, that's the farm, right? So it's cultivating. We actually employ a guy from the city of OPA-LOCKA who went to jail, learned horticulture and farming while in jail, and now he's the manager of the farm. And he teaches everybody. So how do you make this stuff sustainable, restorative justice as well, architecture as the conduit to do all these things. The top left picture is the courtyard of the Arts Recreation Center. So every summer we do technology and arts camps. So they play, we use the location. We rent this entire 4,000 square foot facility for $50 an hour to people who are from the city of OPA-LOCKA, because we realize how expensive it is to have rental space. If you're not from the city of OPA-LOCKA, it's like 10 times that. But it's like if you're from here, you should be able to get at an extremely discounted rate. And so that's what we do. Bottom left corner is just a big event that we had. Some of you are too young for this because this is before your time, but those of you who might be a bit older, if you see the lady that's standing in the front with the magenta shirt, that's the mother from Family Matters. So Steve Urkel and all of them, like that's the mom. She's from OPA-LOCKA, Florida, actually, and she's friends with the woman Stephanie Williams Baldwin. So she comes to a lot of the events that are there also. And inside of the space, we have a gallery. So we have shows, people in the neighborhood, neighborhood artists within the vicinity of OPA-LOCKA. So Miami Gardens, Hialeah, they show their work within our gallery during the summertime. And that's what it looks like from the outside. We got an artist do the mural, and then Walter Hood's office out of Oakland actually did the street landscape design. And so the interesting thing about the mural, and again, students, this is the whole don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. So we weren't supposed to do this mural on the building. It broke every single code violation for the city of OPA-LOCKA. Color palette, graffiti, everything that they had. We were like, screw you all, we don't care. And so they told us, all right, you can have this up for 30 days, and then you got to take it down. All right, cool, 30 days, we got it. Cool, we'll do it. After a couple weeks of them setting it up, they went and got one of their photographers from the city. They have a photo of the building in City Hall, and we never had to take the mural down, right? Because they realized, oh, some of this stuff doesn't make any sense that we're doing. This is some draconian laws that we have, and we need to figure out a way to update our city zoning plan to reflect that. And so now it's still there. The next project that we're able to what's actually in progress now is a movement studio within the historic VFW building, which is across the street. So you can understand, again, 27, 28, 29, all this is happening extremely fast. There's a design team of me, and then just trying to design, and we have a registered architect that's there that would be the project architect of record for a lot of the projects, right? So I'm lead conceptual designer all the way through schematic and design development, and then the project architect takes it from there. And so the next project we're working on is a dance studio. And so these drawings is articulating what the seating for the dance and movement studio will look like, right? So floor, stairs to go up, and then sort of stadium seating for the inside space with the bathroom and changing room underneath. And that's sort of what the seating looks like, right? So the tough thing when you're in a CDC is funding is limited. And so you very rarely get to do really cool stuff because you have to figure out a way, how do I make this money stretch? How do I get as much out of it as possible? So every now and then the CEO will let me have some fun with some projects. And they always stood out like this. And in the end, they always become a much more reduced version because money and money matters. But as it currently stands, this is still the plan for what the actual dance studio would be. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then we're also working on a shipping container marketplace. And so, as I spoke about before, the cool thing about the community development organization is that they care about the entire neighborhood holistically, not just architecture. So that's financial literacy, that's housing literacy, that's social literacy, health literacy, all these different ways that a person needs to get better, because architecture can't solve every single problem. In fact, architecture can't solve most problems. It can just facilitate the learning that helps those problems, right? So if you're trying to tackle homelessness, I don't know how a building can tackle homelessness if you don't also talk about alcoholism or mental health or these other social statuses that go along with those, right? And so OPA-LOCKA is a place where a lot of people have their own business inside of their homes. And it's a location where it's legal. So a lot of people cook, they clean, they do things like that. And so we're like, all right, what if we provided a commercial facility for them to cook within the space? So that's what this is going to be. And then additionally, there's another restaurant that started out of the garage of one of the board members, and now they're going to get their own flagship restaurant. And so that's this here over on the left, right? And so we like to give funky names to stuff. So again, we can change the narrative of the area, because if you say OPA-LOCKA, because of all of the corruption, people immediately raise an eyebrow and say, so are you with the city? And it's like, no, 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 no. I am not a corrupt city official. I'm just a designer who's doing some work in OPA-LOCKA. And so we named it the Thrive Innovation District. And so as you can see, the containers are already being fabricated. Bottom right is bathroom stalls. Left, that's the flagship restaurant in the middle. That's the kiosk that's in the middle, where you have a stand on the outside. Right, so that was the first phase of my life. And when I say first phase, that took like 4.5 years to do all of that. And so once I finished all those things, I started to realize, okay, I'm teaching more now. I'm really starting to understand what I'm good at, what I'm interested in. And this is how I came across the STOOPS project with the Graham Foundation. And the porch is extremely important in a lot of people's families, not just the black community, but I only speak from it from a black person, because that's what I am. And in Chicago, you hang out on the porch, is what you do. Summertime, you're outside, you're having fun, you're watching the cars go by. When people go on prom, everybody's out watching it. It's a true community oriented endeavor. And right, so the porch is community. The porch is surveillance. The porch is performance. The porch is power, right? I mean, there's a literal hierarchy that happens when you stand on top of a porch and you're at the bottom of a porch. It's an extension of the home. So if you're someone who your interior space is extremely finite, the porch becomes an extension and allows you to elongate that, right? Make it bigger. So this is a historic photo of Chicago South Side. I showed this image because it gives you an idea of why the porch is so important. So these units that you see aren't actually single-family homes. These are what's called kitchenettes. Kitchenette means that you have an entire family in a single room. So if you have 4 rooms in the apartment, you have 4 families in the apartment, right? Nowadays, we call that communal living. It's not what it was called in the past. And this was because of restricting zoning laws, restricting housing. Black people weren't allowed to live anywhere but the south side of Chicago when it was first settled. Through legislation, they were able to move around besides that, but the moment black people would move to a new neighborhood, housing values would drop, white flight would happen, people would move away. And so this is what one of those kitchenettes look like, right? So if you can imagine fitting your whole family into a room like this. And if you have 3 or 4 families, you all share the same single restroom. That's just the way that it worked during this time. You just didn't have a choice. And so you hung out there, like you hung out on the porch. This is what you do. I mean, you need space. AC wasn't a thing back then. Passive cooling was a thing. So you open windows. If you didn't open a window, you sat outside, because it gets pretty hot in Chicago. During the summertime, you get like 90% humidity and like around 100 degrees. We have heat strokes every year. People think Chicago, they think cold. If you're from Chicago, you think excruciating heat and frigid cold. You think both. Polar opposites. You get them all. Like, it's a really bizarre place. And so part of my research allowed me to go to 5 cities, tracing the Great Migration through the porch. So Atlanta, Houston, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Detroit, right? So I was able to visit these cities and then look at the porch and all its machinations in various locations and figure out what type of construction methods went on from one location to the other, what type of congregational patterns, how important is it to these people who live there, and you start to find links between the location of where people were during the first migration, the second Great Migration, and then now where people are actually moving from the north back to the south. So a lot of the black population that moved north are actually moving back to southern cities because of the cost of living. So they call it sort of a third migration or a re-migration back to these historic locations. And so I got this offer to do an art installation at Brickell City Center. And because I'm an architect, architects for the most part are dorks. So yes, I am a dork. I was really fascinated by John Hedrick's 9 Square project. That's something I did when I was in school. I don't know if they still do the 9 Square project now. You guys probably like, I don't know what the hell that is. But it's like super conceptual. Here's a kit of parts. Here's 9 blocks. Figure out how to make space with those, right? So I took that as a means to delve into the porch through the use of scaffolding. And what I wanted to do I wanted to show off the importance of the chair that sits on the porch. So I went to some historic black neighborhoods in Miami. The top is OPA-LOCKA, and then there's Liberty City in Little Haiti, and then Coconut Grove in South Miami. And so I went to these locations, and I asked people if I could use their chairs for an exhibition. So in essence, they would also be a part of the exhibition, right? So it's like, all right, you couldn't go to this, or you don't want to go to this, or this is not something you're interested in. Just loan me your chair. It'll be an exhibition. I will give you the chair back. And again, I'm very lucky that I have the face to allow somebody to say, yeah, sure. You don't creep me out asking me for my chair. So they did, and I was able to put the chair into the exhibition. And so this is the layout of the fourth floor of Brickell City Center. And so I'm not sure how many of you will be able to relate to this. Maybe you will, because maybe this is a Southern thing. How many of you have furniture in maybe a grandparent's house that has plastic that you're not allowed to sit on? Right, exactly, right? It's like, this is the nice furniture. You cannot sit on this. I worked really hard for this. Go sit on the porch, or go sit outside. Like, don't sit here. And so that was my childhood growing up. When I go to my granny's house, I knew you can't sit there. Like, and it has plastic, so you think I should be able to sit on it, because there's clearly a film in between my body and the cushion. So if I drop food, it's on plastic. If I'm sweaty, it's on plastic. If I'm dirty from being outside, I'm on the plastic. I'm not in the fibers of the couch. So just it doesn't make sense. But that was sort of the genesis of the project. And so I got these exercise balls, like the yoga balls that everybody uses, and I wrapped those in plastic, right? So I wrapped those, like, you're supposed to sit on it, but you can't sit on it. And so I wrapped them and I put them inside of the scaffolding to signify the couch that we're not allowed to sit on, which forces you to hang out on the periphery of the scaffolding. Actually, there were two structures side by side. So again, 9-square proposal, you see it in plan. How do we create space through the use of these orbs? Give you an idea of scale, so it's double height. So people were not allowed to actually go up to the second level. The people part of the show were, they weren't. Liability issues, those types of things. So this is me and my team starting to put stuff together. And in the end, we created a porch. Right? So we got a very good view out to Brickell City Center. And our idea was, like, how do we create this moment that everybody wants to sit and hang out in? And goddamn, did it work. Like, that was the hangout spot. Like, everybody found themselves there. They moved the location of the bar because everybody was hanging out over there instead. The bar was on the opposite side of the exhibition. And when they realized everybody was hanging out there instead, they moved the bar to the other side, because that's literally what it did. In the top right, one of the performers was like, I really want to do my set on top of this. Like, can I please do it here? And so they come at us like, can you do it? I was like, yeah, but if you fall, it's not my fault. Like, I'm not dealing with that, but go for it. And so all the chairs you see are the chairs from those various neighborhoods. And they loved it so much, like, can you do one outside on the patio also? Which, again, architects in the room, you know there's certain height limits we have before we have to go and get approvals through the building department and things like that. So we kind of just skip a lot of rules. Don't do what I do. I don't follow a lot of rules. Sometimes you should, in fact, follow rules. I was fortunate enough to be able to do this without it. And then again, it worked. So people were outside sitting there all the time. The problem is, over the course of the installation, which was just about 2 months, all of the pink balls were starting to disappear because people would get drunk and they would take the yoga balls. So at a certain point, it just became just the scaffolding and the chairs. And I was like, well, at least they didn't steal the chairs. I can go give these back. And so that was the first part of the Sacred Stoop. The second part of Sacred Stoops was our gallery there saw that installation and then asked me to do exhibition design for another exhibition they had at Emerson Dorsch Gallery. And so it's going to be for this all women's convening, and the idea was to have stairs that can be multifunctional. So again, the extension of the porch, how do I create this environment? And so I started out with this drawing of just like, what is a porch supposed to do? And so it's like, you sit, you stand, you dance. How do I make this thing work? And so I came up with this explodable stair, right? So it's a sleeping nook, it's a library, it's a beacon, signage, model stand, podium, all based off the necessary things that the exhibition required. And so started doing study models, just like, how does this thing work? Well, how can we reposition the stair? How can they work together? And then we started building the thing, right? So my team, we were out, we had the wood, we CNC'd a lot of stuff, we built it all together. That's the full stair on the left. And then that's when it's pulled apart, doing this various usage. And that was the first phase. And then the second phase was us cladding it in a shiny, what is the word? Vinyl that allowed us to have it within the space. And as top left, you can see they started to use it for performances and conversations and whatnot. It's pretty cool inside of the space. And so that was the porch project. And then that gets me into what's going on now, which is the Delray Beach proposal. So we've talked about how to change a narrative with the city, OPA-LOCKA. We've talked about explaining a narrative to a large group of people, the porch. And now we're going to get into creating a narrative for a location, and that's Delray Beach. And so Delray Beach is in West Palm Beach, Florida. It's like an hour north of Miami. It was actually incorporated 1 year after OPA-LOCKA, so it's also pretty old. And it's a location that was settled by a very large Bahamian population. So I don't know if any of you all know, but Bahamians are some of the key people to help build South Florida. They were brought in from the Bahamas, and they did a lot of the building. And in this area of Delray, they were forced to live on one side of town called the West Settlers District. And they weren't allowed to cross into the white side of town, even though they were the labor force. They weren't allowed to go to the beach except for certain times. On certain days, they couldn't go at all. It became extremely isolating. And then a hurricane came through and wiped out quite a bit of the area in 1947. And so when that happened, had to rebuild. And when you start to rebuild, you have one of the earliest high schools in South Florida that was predominantly black, well, all black at the time. You know, this is still during segregation. And so a woman came to OPA-LOCKA, saw the work that was done there, reached out to me via email and said, hey, saw you in OPA-LOCKA, super interesting. You think you can pull this off again in Delray? I was like, I have no idea, but I'm willing to try. And so she said, all right, here's money. Here's some projects. What do you want to do? And so we put in for this porch grant. So see, extension, porch to here, through the Community Revitalization Grant Fund by the Community Foundation of West Palm Beach. And so we said we want to find 5 houses within the district, and we want to renovate and beautify their porches because a lot of people use this. A lot of people use the area, they sit there. And so when we had the funders come in and interview us, we had tons of people from the neighborhood that come in. And every single person had a story about what their porch meant to them. Whether it was sitting, watching their friends, their grandmother might be outside. My favorite story was the grandmother who was sitting on her porch with rocks and throw them at people because she was a bit senile at the time. And so she felt as though you're coming into my personal space, and it was safety. So her being elevated from everyone else allowed her the ability to protect her property. And she did that by throwing rocks at individuals. My own personal story to my porch is whenever there's like prom or anything, everybody's outside. So normally I show a video of my nephew, and he's like on the porch, and he has on this full tuxedo with a red carpet going down the stairs, and he's dancing, everybody's outside. But it's too technical for the presentation, so I just took it out. But it's something that that's the porch is so important to our families. I was actually arrested off of my porch when I was 16 for mistaken identity. Apparently someone who looked like me committed a crime, and so the police came and I walked off of my porch. Whereas if I had just stayed there, by Chicago law, they would have had to talk to my parents first. But because I didn't know, I removed myself from this safety and then went out to the public sidewalk. And the moment that happened, they put me in handcuffs, and I'm laughing the whole time like this has to be some sort of big elaborate joke. I don't know what's going on. My mom's hysterical. She's like, what's going on? I'm like, Ma, this has to be a joke. Like, come on now. Why would I be getting arrested? Like, this would be fine. I ended up being in jail for 4.5 hours because of that. And the 4.5 hours were spent in an adult cell, not in a juvenile cell as I was supposed to because I was only 16. And they waited until like 3 hours and 30 minutes to ask me my shoe size. And then once they realized I was 4 sizes smaller than the person who said their shoes got stolen, they're like, okay, you can go. It's like, you wouldn't think to ask me this on my porch as opposed to waiting 4 hours later. But that's just what happened, right? So like it just has its own personal connection. And then for a while, my nephew who was there who saw this would see the police and he'd go, there's my uncle. Like, I'm right here, kid. Like, it's not issues. Like, that's not what's going on. But these are some of the housing typologies in the area that we're doing the porch interventions on. So as you can see, you see tons of chairs out there. Like, they use these spaces currently. But there's with a bit more infrastructure, a bit more TLC to become better spaces. Here's another one. And so we found these specific homes based off of the block leaders in the neighborhood. So DELRAY is a elderly community for the most part. A lot of people are from there, but they're much older, and they really do police their neighborhood. So a lot of the block captains, we pick them out because they're so important to the community. That's like, all right, you've done all this work by making sure it's clean and it's safe. How can we help you? How can we repay you? And so we found the ones that we think need the most work, and so we're doing the interventions at their homes. But the other thing we're doing is we're having a design competition for our students at University of Miami where they're going to design chairs. And the chairs will find itself onto anyone's porch who also wants to be seen as a link to the project. Right? So you have these chairs that become a signifier in addition to the porches at certain locations. I'd like to show this one because this person is an entrepreneur. They cut hair on their porch. Totally illegal in the city of Delray Beach, but who cares? It's also not even his home. He rents there. So we have to convince the homeowner to let us do a porch intervention there so that he can continue to illegally cut hair on the porch. But it is there to do it, so it just seems fun to me. But yeah, that's another one of the homes. And so we're trying to figure out these geometries that work with the houses that clearly show that it's something different that's going on, right? So like there's an extension, it's a porch, but it's also covered. It's something that shows that this is an important location within the area. And so we're experimenting with different cladding materials, try to figure out which one we want to do. We're talking to contractors now. We have roughly 12 to 15,000 for each house. So some of this can be done through in-kind donation. We're finding local laborers in the area that we can leverage their skill set. What type of local building materials can we use, can we employ? This is extremely speculative at the moment, but we're currently in the midst of making all of this come to fruition. And we try to choose 4 distinctly different housing typologies so that we can find different ways to do interventions at each one of those different houses. And so the next thing we're working on up there is a master plan. So this A here is a historic church, Mount Baptist in Delray Beach off of 4th Street. And they own all of those parcels that are highlighted. And they've tasked me with creating a master plan for them so they can figure out how to develop all of their properties there. And so one of the things that we were able to do was every last Friday of the month, there's a market for people in the area. And we figured, all right, can we create a public porch for this area so that people can come, congregate, have fun, and we'll use a shipping container to do that. And so, again, they gave me free reign, design what I wanted to design, and came up with this idea for a container that all of the walls could open up, and it can become a completely covered area. And people can do whatever they want to do within the space. Right, so it's performance, it's play, it's fun, it's a market. There's so many different things that they can do and can generate for the people in the area. And so we started to fabricate the thing. Right, so you can see it there. It's a standard 8-foot by 20-foot container. The walls are mechanized, so you push a button and everything goes up. It was a bit difficult working with the contractor, but as most architects in here know, that's typically how projects work. And fortunately, we were able to get everything done only 6 months behind schedule. And so that's what it looks like. And so that's it closed in the top right, this jewel box. And then when it's open, it becomes the spectacle that it's supposed to be with the LED lights and things like that. And so that's the final image of what the thing completely done. So it got installed a couple weeks ago. So once the end of the month happens and we have the first market, I'll be able to have photographs of it actually serving its purpose, as opposed to when we had people that were around. So I do want to just take some photographs inside of here so we can just show what the thing looks like. That's the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Germane. That was awesome. Very cool look at the work. I was curious, as you were talking about the projects, about the different kinds of actors around each project. So there's investors, There's, people in the community who are actually going to be, whose lives might be affected by the project. And then there's people actually helping with the project. There's people, and then there's you.
Yep.
So I wonder what, who do you see as being the catalyst, besides yourself, of course, but which, of course, you're the catalyst to it all, but like, who do you see as being the most, like, excited or enthusiastic, or like, where does the next gear in the whole system turn?
Sure. I don't think I'm the catalyst. I think I'm a conduit, right? So to help bring. I have a certain set of skills that schools of architecture have taught me, and so I'm able to use those skills in a productive way. I think the best thing about architecture education is it teaches how to problem solve, and you can do that in a multitude of ways. Like, I didn't mention that now I sit on the city of OPA-LOCKA's planning and zoning board, so I'm able to implement changes at a policy level, which has a way bigger impact than the architectural proposals that I'm doing, right? So I think the catalyst of these projects are the people in the community, the people that care. Because those community members, they come out in full force. They go to meetings after being at work for 9-10 hours straight. They always show up. And they're the ones that fight for stuff. Because I really don't have the wherewithal to sit through all the community meetings with the commissioners, because I know they're all lying. Like, I know how politics work. My mom never wanted me to be an architect. She wanted me to be a lawyer or a politician. It's like, lady, you're nuts. I love architecture. That's going to happen. But, you don't fight back with your mother, so you just do everything that they tell you. So I would go to all these things to become a lawyer, knowing in the back of my mind, I'm just going to be an architect anyway, so whatever. But it helped me, because when I go into these spaces, I understand how they think. I understand how to talk to them on their level. I learned very quickly, you're full of it. Like, this is just BS. But community members will come out every single time. They push back, they fight, they hold them accountable. And then they come back to me and hold me accountable. They're like, well, you said you wanted to do this. Do you actually want to do it? Or is this just lip service? To which I'd have to decide, all right, if I do this, it means I have to stay in Miami for 2 more years. I mean, I'll always tell Kathy, yeah, I'm leaving next year. I'm out of here. Like, I'm done. This project takes a lot of time. Nobody ever told me that doing this type of work would be so impactful, but also take so much investment from a mental standpoint. Like, you get fatigued. And every year, I'd still be there, and then she'd be like, I thought you were leaving. I thought you were leaving. I was like, well, this community member said that I said I was going to do this, so I'd have to do it. This community said I'd do it, so I have to do it. And it's gotten to a point where I've learned that because I was given this set of skills through schools of architecture, that it's my duty to do the things that I'm doing. But I think without them, it's completely impossible, because otherwise, who am I doing it for, right?
Hi. That was a really amazing presentation.
Thank you.
I took a lot from that, especially as a student who sees designing for locals as being a very important part of what we do. And I guess my question is just, what's your advice on getting into the mindset of the community? And how do we put ourselves in the space of the locals so that we can actually better design for them? And then what has been the biggest thing that you've learned from doing all of these things?
Gotcha. So at my undergrad, I never did a single project like this. So I had no idea this is where my career trajectory would end up. I didn't learn about community-oriented architecture until I had my first internship in Cape Town, South Africa. And my boss was doing these super, super rich, fancy houses in the suburbs of Cape Town. Like, houses that cost no less than like $1.2 million. Like, super expensive. And then he's like, all right, Germane, we're going to Kailicha now. I'm like, where's Kailicha? It's a township. He's like, this is actually what I'm more interested in. These projects allow me to do this stuff for free. And so we go into these neighborhoods and places where they didn't have running water, they didn't have infrastructure, and we do design interventions and we do work and whatnot. And I was like, holy hell, architecture can do this? Like, I had no idea. It absolutely blew my mind. This was in between undergrad and graduate school. And then when I was in graduate school, I was fortunate enough to have a professor, and that's Jennifer Bonner, who was mentioned before, who became my mentor because she went to Auburn University, and she was a part of the Rural Studio, where they do a lot of work like this under Sam Mockbee. Right? So I was like, wait a minute, there's other locations that do this also? Like, architecture can be this impactful, can be this powerful? And then she took me to Alabama to go see the work. Right? So then when I got to OPA-LOCKA, I was like, all right, I'm in this, I'm fully invested. And yet I still wanted to use my expertise as a designer. And so I didn't listen. And they would say, we want this, we want a park. I'm like, you don't really want a park. Like, I can give you all these better things because this is the skill set I have. Like, allow me to show you the beautiful things I can give you. And it was at that moment I learned, if you want to do this stuff the right way, you have to shut up. And you have to remove the architectural saviorism. It just has to be completely removed from the scenario. Because you're going to learn very quickly that the things you might think or the things you might prescribe are not the things that's necessary. They have completely different priorities. And at the same time, it's your job to educate them on the things that they could potentially have, because some of them don't know. And so it was a fine line of negotiation between, I know this is what you want, but here's the potential for what you could have. And then once you get the information, you take a step back and say, all right, you choose. If you still choose option A, we'll go with option A. If you choose option B, I'll show you the benefits for option B instead. And so some of the latter stuff in the project, like the container, like the farm, those were all things that they did not want at the beginning. But once they started to become more involved in the project and develop trust, because a lot of it is trust, and you coming through on the promises that you give, then you get to do the really fun stuff and say, all right, cool, I've earned your trust now, I can do these things. But if you go into it as an expert who isn't willing to listen to people, you put your ideas on other individuals, you're not there, you're not in the trenches with them, they don't care. They don't believe you. It won't last. It'll get built, it'll be destroyed.
Let me add my thanks as well. And my question is really a follow-up. I was curious how this comes into your teaching, how all this work that you're doing affects what you do in studio.
Okay. So I was recently appointed assistant professor. And so with that, I'm able to do my own upper level studios and seminars and whatnot. And I thought it was going to be difficult to get it into my courses. Like, how do I get this porch research into there? Students probably don't want to deal with, like, why is a porch generator of a studio? But I've learned actually really, really receptive. So right now I actually have a studio that's running where we're looking at the porch in multiple scales. A one-to-one porch, which is off of a shotgun home, to a public plaza at Miami-Dade County, right, which still has properties and operates as a porch. And so we're doing these things at various scales, and they're all super excited about it. And I find ways to keep them engaged. So right now, I'm using augmented reality as a way to keep them engaged through the porch. And so we're doing that with these magically super high-tech $3,000 headsets that they're like super, super into. But additionally, because so many of these things have money behind them, every student wants to build something before they graduate. And so it's super easy to say, take my studio during the presentation, and you say, and we're going to build it, right? So when you do that, they're like, all right, I'm in. Let's do it. Like, let's go. And then they always change their mind halfway, and they say, oh, man, why did I sign up for this? Like, I actually have to build it. But the way it starts is like, it's extremely, extremely easy. And I've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to continue to get grants after grants after grants to allow me to do this type of work. Obviously, with our current political condition, that it's a hotbed topic. So like, nobody wants to be left out in the cold. So everybody wants to give you money. So right now it's like, all right, here's 10,000, here's 55, here's 8. Go wild. And I tell my students, look, I don't really need this. I have my salary, and I have my professional projects like a house I didn't show or these types of things that pay me. This type of research stuff, I'll pay you. So all of my students that work on the projects, they always get paid as well, right? So it's paid internships only. Because I did the unpaid internship, not a fan, but I get it. And so that's how I'm able to get it within the studio. So I typically have a waiting list of students to get into my studios.
I was wondering how when you build your projects and when you think of your projects, how do you work on not pushing out the people that are already living in the area?
Okay, great question. Gentrification is like the boogeyman word, right? You hear it and you immediately like, oh, wow, like it's tough. But one thing the project has taught me is you can't improve a neighborhood or redevelop a neighborhood without some gentrification. It's impossible. Absolutely impossible. If somebody tells you can't, they're lying to you. And I had to learn that through practice. But what you want to mitigate is you want to mitigate displacement. Right? So you want to figure out a way to allow people to understand this is what's happening in your neighborhood. Here's how you can fight back. And that's what me being on the planning and zoning board allows. But at the end of the day, some people just want the money. And you can't tell somebody to not take the money because it's theirs. It's their property. And so that's the part of it that never really gets told. It's the fact that all you can do is empower and educate a person on what's happening in their community. And at the end of the day, the onus is on them to make a decision. And so what we try to do is we try to like, okay, here's what's happening. Amazon's moving in. This is where they're moving to. If I were you, I would not sell my property. This is what's happening. This is what restaurants moving in. I would not sell my property. Now, if they still choose to, it is what it is. But we definitely do the enough work to let them know what's going on. And the new project in Delray Beach, we know none of those community members are moving because they've been there forever. They're not going anywhere, which is actually pretty awesome. Like anytime development comes, they go fight it tooth and nail. Like it's not happening at all. And so with them, sit right next to them. Community members waiting. I finish class at 6. I drive all the way up an hour and a half to Delray. I get there like 9 o'clock. We have conversations. We talk. They ask me, how did you make it up here? Don't you have somewhere to be? I'm like, well, you're lucky. I don't have kids and I'm not married. So if that were not the case, I probably would not be here. But fortunately for you, that's the condition, so I can do this type of labor now, right? And so that's the way that I run my practice. And then a lot of times, the students that I employ, I give them full projects. It's all right, look, this is the container. We need furniture for the container. That's your project. And you need to go to community meetings. You have to go talk to people, find your way to Delray Beach, and then I will pop in occasionally. But there's other things that's going on. I got to write grants, have to do stuff for studio. So I don't have the wherewithal to do all those things. And so now how do I empower the people I employ to also do things as well?
Hi, I was wondering how, when you're given these projects, they're pretty wide open program-wise as to how you are addressing the area, how do you go about choosing the programs which you want to develop?
So a lot of that actually comes with the community members. So as the young lady asked me before about how do I not push out people, it's that back and forth conversation about the necessities for the area. So while the program might seem like it's pretty broad and like I'm going to redevelop a neighborhood, there's always strategic things that they want. It's like we know we need somewhere for our kids to play, or we know we want somewhere to sit down and eat. And that sort of immediately restricts the program to where, all right, how can I find an innovative way to deal with this? Excuse me. And so the container, the last one, for example, the open jewel box, they told us, we know we need somewhere to store things. We know we want to have a farmer's market. How can we do this? That isn't just us going to Costco and buying some of those like $100 tents, the 10 by 10 all white tents you find at tailgates. Right? They're like, we can just go buy a bunch of those and do it, and we put them up and we finish with it, right? I was like, well, what if we did this container instead and made it a bit more interesting? You probably get more people, has a much longer lifespan, it's more aesthetically pleasing. It's something the other side of town doesn't have. The other side of town being the more affluent side of town, and it'll find a way for them to come over because that's a thing that attracts individuals, and they went for it, right? And that's how that got built. So a lot of times it's being able to understand, all right, this is the bare necessities of what you want, and now how can I use the skill set I have to elevate that a bit, right? Or at the very least, just give you exactly what you're asking for. But if you can, you always want to see what can I do a much more aesthetically pleasing version of it instead. And that's the toughest thing. Like if you ever decide to do this type of work, please understand that it's always not going to be pretty. Just being honest with you. They're going to be telling you like, oh, I do not want to photograph this thing. Like it looks gross. But then you understand it's helping tons of people. Like this is a place having baby showers and wedding rehearsals and birthday parties and dance contests. And it's helping tons and tons of people. And at the end of the day, it's just a box. And you're like, the architect in you is like, but I could have did so much more that was more interesting and aesthetically pleasing. And they don't care. It's just like, we got what we want. Thank you. And then you have to check your ego at the door and be, all right, fine. I did something good for the neighborhood. This is what I wanted to do. And then you find ways to get the big project that allow you the freedom to do the more fun stuff because somebody might see how well you execute something smaller and they give you the opportunity to do something bigger. And when it happens, you have to nail it. Like you have no choice. And if you nail it, you get more projects and more projects and more projects. Cool. Thank you so much for having me.